Wonderful. Hello, everyone, and welcome to tonight's Raising Capital in the EU and EU Investment Landscape seminar for our Paris trade mission. We have some wonderful guests with us tonight. We're in for a real treat. Their knowledge is just absolutely incredible. So any questions, keep them prepared for our Q&A. Firstly, before we jump in, I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional lands of the Gadigal people. That's where I live and work. And I'd encourage you to pop your traditional lands in the chat if you know where you're coming from tonight. So we'll get started with a couple of little introductions. I'd love to pass to Pippa.
So hi, I'm Pippa Gawley. I'm the founding partner of Zero Carbon Capital. So we invest at pre-seed and seed across Europe in climate tech companies specifically with a scientific innovation focus. So we're looking for physical innovation, the atoms, not the bits. And we're looking to address the biggest unsolved problems of climate change. So we're looking for half-gigaton problem spaces and transformative innovations that will help to fix the underlying problems. This is our second fund. Our first was focused just in the UK and was a bit smaller. And then I started investing actually in the US as an angel investor about 8 years ago. So I have 3 different portfolios across 2 continents. I don't know much about the ecosystem in Australia, so I'm really looking forward to learning from you guys.
Wonderful. Thank you, Pippa. And we'll pass along to Stuart.
Thank you, Pippa and Olivia. So my name's Stuart Dullard. I'm a partner at Ashurst, the global law firm who heads the venture capital team here. I'm joined by a very senior partner from the firm, Francois Hello, who's from our Paris office. And apart from residing in Paris, he heads the corporate transactions team for Europe and the Middle East. So a little bit about me and the firm. Ashurst is a global corporate law firm. We've got 31 offices in around 20 countries, very large offices in Australia. I'm in Sydney, offices all throughout continental Europe, including Paris, where you're very excitingly travelling to, and our headquarters is in London. Look, Francois and I have similar practices. We're both corporate lawyers by trade, so we help with fundraisings, mergers and acquisitions, and IPOs, and that's pretty broad and fairly general. However, both of us focus on high growth technology companies. So our clients are high growth technology companies that are typically founder-led, like most likely where all of you are from, but we also act for private capital investors, albeit private equity, growth, and venture capital funds. And we also act for corporates who either have a dedicated corporate venture capital division. I do all the work for BP Ventures in Australia, who focuses very much on energy transition, or just large corporates that are looking to make innovative investments in high growth companies, because they acknowledge while they're large, they may not be the best at innovating quickly. So look, as a law firm, we act for corporates. We've got 2 core areas of focus. One is technology, the other one is energy transition. So it's a no-brainer for us to be involved with Climate Salad, who do a fantastic job in Australia. And a little bit more specifically, the team that we lead in the venture capital space is really dedicated to and passionate about helping people, investors or founders or executives who want to build companies that are building a better tomorrow. And yes, we act for fintechs who might, build a better, faster, cheaper personal loan or whatever they build, or payment system. That's great. But I think when we think about the fact that lawyers often work, 70, 80, 90 or more hours a week, we really want to be dedicating our time to advising and assisting people that are going to leave the planet in a better state than they found it. So it's a real pleasure to work in that practice, and it's a pleasure to be here with you tonight, and of course this morning for Francois and Pippa.
Amazing. Thanks, Stuart. We might just go around my Zoom screen. So Michael, you are up first.
Hello, everyone. Yes, I'm Michael Gronard. I'm with Trade Investment Queensland's mining resources and energy team here in Brisbane. I know most of the people going over to Hello Tomorrow. There's a couple that I would love to have a chat with before we actually go. Or before you actually go. Unfortunately, I won't be joining the trip, but if there's anything I can do, prior to your departure, or even while you're over there. If I can offer any support, please do not hesitate to let me know. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Michael. David.
Hi, David Hume. I represent EcoDual Energy, who are a manufacturer of power electronics equipment to support decarbonisation of the grid. I won't elaborate on that now. I'm calling you from the UK, where I've been now for just over 2 months on a business development trip. Thanks very much, Olivia.
Thanks, David. Eva. Oh, you're on mute.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Yeah, I'm Eva from Blue Carbon. Yeah, we deliver deep sea rich cold seawater to the surface to encourage the phytoplankton blooms. We sequestrate carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and then we support the aquaculture and the Great Barrier Reef ecosystem restoration. Yeah, so glad to learn all of you.
Wonderful, and some great ocean solutions coming out from you, multifaceted impact there from Blue Carbon. Prashant.
Yeah, I'm Prashant, representing Infigo Labs. We are a startup that electrifies the production of very high temperature heat as required for the hard to abate sector.
Wonderful, and big need for that as well. Greg.
Hi everyone, my name is Greg Perkins, co-founder and CEO of Wildfire Energy. At Wildfire, we've developed a technology which breaks down waste at high temperatures, and we can avoid landfill emissions and make renewable energy products from waste going to landfill, such as electricity, hydrogen, and biofuels.
Love it. Wonderful. And Prue.
I am here with a video blanked. Hopefully I'm not on mute anymore. There we go. Hi, my name's Prue Bauer. I am from Air Garden, which I co-founded with my brother Tom. So we make and manufacture vertical aeroponic gardens catering to both, I guess, residential usage, the schools and education market, and we also have a commercial air garden as well, which is good for people and the planet. We use 95% less water space, no herbicides or pesticides, and grow in the most unlikely of places, particularly from an urban perspective, whether that be rooftops, car parks, greenhouses, anywhere that's unlikely, we can grow. Good to meet everyone.
Thanks, Prue, and such an interesting solution for legacy cities in Europe as well.
Very much so.
Julie. You're on mute, I think, still.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Sorry, we're just commuting. I'm the founder inventor of Power Blocks with my co-founder hubby here. We're all about modular energy storage systems that are distributed and that can operate as a hive so that you can have it in scalable applications infinitely across multiple estates in views and capabilities for safe installation for ordinary people and asset maintenance and fault detection.
Wonderful. Thanks, Julie. Tony, we're just doing a little quick intro. We'd love to hear from you as well.
Sure. Tony King. I'm the Executive Director of Innovation Strategy with the Department of Environment, Science and Innovation here in Queensland. So most people know us probably more under the title of Advanced Queensland, or may have run into the Chief Entrepreneur, who are all extensions of our programs.
Thanks, Tony. And Francois. I know Stuart's done a little bit of an intro, so hopefully we can grab you.
Yes, good morning to everyone. Sorry, I was in mute. It's a good morning from France. Sorry, I'm not activating right now my video feed. I'm driving. But just want to tell you that, as Stuart said earlier, I'm corporate partner here in the Paris office of Ashurst. We have a strong venture capital and tech practice, going from corporate to IT, IP, and any type of legal assistance in respect of that sector and that type of equity raisings. And I've been practicing venture capital and tech law somehow for the last 25 years since the first internet bubble. And so I will be presenting together with Stuart this morning, and I will be more than happy to discuss also about the landscape of venture capital in France in particular, and possibly about potential meetings you could organize during your trip to Paris.
Wonderful. Thanks, Francois. And then lucky last is Paul.
Hi everyone. My apologies. I'm also getting using video.
Hi, Paul. It might be me, but your internet's a little bit fuzzy. Can we hear Paul?
No.
Oh, I think this might be an internet issue, Paul. We'll get back to Paul. Hopefully, his internet will jump back online, and we can hear from Paul. But in the meantime, we might jump into Pippa's presentation.
Hi, everybody. So I have put together a couple of slides just to talk a bit about the differences. Well, just talk about the ecosystem over here in the EU. As I've already confessed, I'm not so familiar with the tech scene, the climate tech scene in Australia. Looking forward to learning more about it from you all in person in Paris, hopefully. So I'm going to talk broadly about Europe. Please pitch in with how you think it's different to Australia, and hopefully do a bit to prepare you for some of the conferences you're going to in Paris. So I've focused on Hello Tomorrow, but I can also talk about Change Now. I believe some of you are going to that. And I'm really happy just to have a kind of informal Q&A about any questions. You've probably all traveled widely and know everything about Paris already, but if you do have any really daft questions like what sort of plug do we use, what's the time difference, how do I get about, please just jump in with that. And I'm really keen to be a sort of friendly investor for you here over in Europe. So I'm gonna share my screen. Hopefully, I'm just gonna get that going. Which window is the right one to share this one? Okay. Okay, can you see that okay?
Perfect. That's great.
Great. So if I hit slideshow, does that work?
Looking good.
Awesome.
Great. Okay. So I've put my email address in there. Like I said, please reach out. Like I said, we're Zero Carbon Capital, team of 5. 3 of us will be at Hello Tomorrow and looking forward to meeting you there. We're normally based in London, one of us in Berlin. And we invest across Europe. We don't invest in Australia, sadly. And this is one of the points I'm going to come to later on about the first question to ask investors. Please pitch in with questions throughout. I'm happy to be interrupted. Okay, so just a little bit first about overall what's going on in the climate world. You don't need me to tell you this. It's been a bad year, 2023. Everything was down, equity, debt, grant, everything. Approximately 25% from 2022. 2021 was also high. But, if we look back at pre-pandemic years, we're higher than that. So I guess that's the kind of takeaway. Yes, it's you'll hear a lot of doom and gloom, and yes, it is tough out there. There's a lot of competition for every pound or euro or dollar out there. But we are still on the upward overall arc of history, just with a bit of a correction. So everywhere is seeing the same sort of thing. In terms of the downturn in 2023, Interestingly, not Asia. That seems to be like the one real growth area. And given that you guys are kind of closer to that, I'd be really keen to see if that's kind of giving you more optimism that there's you know, such a growth story on your doorstep. And one thing to note is that the capital stack looks really different all around the world. So it looks like you guys in Australia have got a lot more equity going on in terms of financing for early stage startups, and perhaps less in the way of grants and debt support, which is generally from the local or regional governments. So there's a lot of that at the very early stage in Europe, and so that will make a big difference to the competitors that you're facing in Europe and the US. In terms of how they've been financed, but also in terms of what investors are expecting you to have at a certain stage. So just to be aware that they might not be expecting you to not have much grant income in the past. Is that a question there, or just a blip? Just a blip.
Sorry, is
Cool.
that just percentages? Was that just percentages? Is it?
Yeah, that's percentages. Yes. So I'm just saying relative. So this is dollar amounts. So this is saying, I think compared to other parts of the world that you will be kind of competing against, so compared to America, Europe, and Asia, I think the overall funding pot is smaller in Australia, and that it's more focused on equity than the grant-based and debt-based client finance capital stack that you might see in other geographies. So just that's just something to be aware of, that there are different finance stacks by geography. Does that make sense?
Yes, thanks.
Cool. I'm just going to plow on. And again, another point that you are probably well aware of, but when we look back to how things were like 4 or 5 years ago, the amount of time from founding your company to pre-seed to seed to Series A to Series B, that amount of time has increased. So in particular, the pre-seed to seed and seed to Series A part of the journey is now a lot longer, and that means you need to be much more organized and not relying upon the next round to be a done deal kind of in the bank in the same way that you might have been able to do a few years ago. The good news is that I think a lot of you are quite early stage. I know there's a big range on the call, but for those of us who are focused on the early stage, which is us, it's not so affected. So whether we look at the actual amounts, the actual numbers of deals, the actual size of the deals, or the valuations, the graphs actually look pretty similar. And they all say that essentially the earliest stages are the least affected by the current kind of downturn. And the kind of reason for that is really just that when you're looking at a valuation of a company, there's only so low that it can go. So I think there's just less room for variation at the very early stage. That's our hypothesis anyway. But certainly we've seen not such a big variation in valuations over the last few years. It's stayed pretty stable in the pre-seed world, but we definitely see the flat rounds and the down rounds and the kind of reduced expectations at the Series A stage. Cool. So that was just a little bit about kind of the macro climate. And then I'm going to talk a bit about your European tour. So like I said, I'm going to focus on Hello Tomorrow. It's a conference that I've been to twice, and it's quite a consistent format. And the first day is the Investor Day. And please, Olivia, if you've already gone through all of this in a lot of detail, do stop me. But I found that actually it's something that is quite difficult to get this level of information before you attend an event. So the Investor Day, which I assume that you'll be attending, is that right?
We've applied. A lot of us have applied, and we're still waiting on final out. So I think this is good general advice for how to network anyway throughout the conference.
Yeah. So the Investor Day itself is it's in a different location to the rest of the conference. And the general advice for all of Hello Tomorrow or all of any conference is to be prepared. So book meetings in advance through the app. to try and make the most efficient use of time. Like you might be able to cram in 16 meetings in the day because there's half-hour slots, but to be efficient with your time and with everybody else's time, really make sure that there's likely to be a fit before you book the meeting and before you initiate the conversation. Otherwise, you just create a lot of bad will. So really look at the investment mandate of that investor and of that fund. Look at their portfolio companies. So have they invested in this kind of thing before? And specifically, have they invested outside of Europe or America or wherever they are based before? Because there's no point in going to a US investor and just that's never invested outside the US and expecting them to suddenly invest in Australia. It's just not going to happen. So, make sure that you think there's going to be a likely fit there. And I'll talk a bit more about that in a bit as well. Make sure you complete your profile section in the app. So you can put detail about your company and yourself and your photo in the app. Definitely do that. It's amazing how many people don't. But I've been, I often get invited to meetings with companies and there's just no information on the app about who it is, like what position they are in the company or what the company does. So I have to then go off and look up on LinkedIn and the internet or whatever. So it's very trivial to put your information in there. So it's very easy. Then assuming that the investor accepts the meeting, make sure you send your deck or one-pager about your company before the meeting. So then ideally you can hit the ground running with a more meaningful conversation on the day. Share your phone number. Yes, you can contact people through the app, but if you are on WhatsApp, which I recommend, because that's the kind of default for communications over here, then just share your number on WhatsApp, and then if there's any problems, you need to rearrange, you can't find the person, you can just contact them easily on the day. And this another top tip. It's like the investor day is basically hundreds of desks. It looks like an exam hall, and every investor will have their own little desk and their name on it. And so if you go to somebody's desk and they're not there, then they're probably just over getting coffee. But if you don't know what they look like, then you can't track them down. So be prepared to go and find them if they're not at their desk. When you do meet investors, make sure you're, again, using your time very efficiently. So the best thing you can do is know who you're talking to. So are they technical? Do they understand your industry? Did they understand your geography? Pitch your conversation at the right level. Be very clear. So practice communicating what the core of your innovation is. So why are they going to be interested in you? Be aware of the fact that there's lots of competing solutions in every space. So just be very crystal clear about what it is that you're doing differently and therefore why you are interesting. And then if the investor says on the day, look, it's not a fit for us, then just thank them for their time and that's it. But if there is a potential fit, then obviously follow up with your deck, your email, and any kind of answers to questions after the event. Then some very practical notes. Bring water. So I found in previous years that I just there weren't enough snacks and it was quite difficult to leave your desk and get away to the snacks. And you might find if you're on back-to-back meetings as well. So make sure you're kind of fed and watered because you might struggle to get the right resources on the day. And leave some time that is not allocated so that you can be spontaneous. Like if you meet a great investor the night before at some networking event, you can still meet up with them on the day. Great.
Excuse me, Pippa, that's great.
Yes, go on.
Great tips. Thank you very much. Question for Olivia. Is it possible that we can have a bit of a check-in as to where we're at with the Investor Day registration towards the end of the call, perhaps?
Yeah, I'm actually meeting with the Hello Tomorrow organisers this evening, about an hour after our call. So hopefully I'll have an update for everyone after.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Thanks.
Cool.
Thank you.
Can I ask,
then
is it related to also registering your email so that we can use the app as Pippa has so excellently suggested we lean into?
Sorry, what?
Sorry.
It seems like the registration of my email or logins not registering. I may have emailed everyone earlier, but it just that whole capability is not open to me at the moment. So I just wanted to ask, is that a tech issue with my registration or everyone else's? as
Let's
well.
take it
So
up.
I think I've started getting messages through the app, but I haven't been sent the app login thing yet. So I think there's probably just a little bit of a mismatch in timing, and that they haven't actually opened up the app to everybody yet. So I would say just hang fire. You know, it's still quite a long way ahead of the conference. And again, the timing, you need to kind of get the sweet spot between, right, it's still a few weeks out. I haven't even started thinking about it yet to like, oh, it's today and I've now got no slots left. So, you know, I'd say kind of approaching people the week before the conference is the kind of the best place to aim
great.
for.
Thank you, Pippa. I was feeling I feel like I'm doing something wrong. I can't sign in. Thank you.
Has anybody else tried to sign in yet?
No, I asked the organizers about the app like 2 days ago, and they said it hasn't been released yet. So unless and again, I'm chatting with them tonight. So any Hello Tomorrow related admin logistics question, let's take it offline. And don't worry, I'm meeting with them tonight.
Yeah, I think it's because I think I'm just getting some notifications because I'm in the app from previous years. But I don't think it's been opened up to new people. I think it's just a mistake, basically. So I'd say don't worry about it yet, and they certainly will send you a lot of emails once the platform is open, like a lot. So so it's the same app for all of the events, like the Investor Day, and then there's a few official side events, but the main events are the Investor Day and then the Global Summit. It's the same app for all of it, but you will have access to different people depending on what you're signed up to. But your profile will look the same throughout.
Wonderful.
So then moving on to the Global Summit bit. So again, use the app. There's multiple stages. On the whole, I would say don't worry too much about the stages. Like if you've got spare time, absolutely go and kind of absorb. It's very useful, I find, to just calibrate generally, like what are people talking about? What is the general sentiment? And in particular, the pioneer stage, which is pitches. So like going to spend time just watching other people pitches, it really helps you understand, like, you know, oh, that was a really good pitch. They communicated very effectively. What sort of valuations are people talking about? What sort of raises are people doing? You know, really what stage of commercial readiness are they at? So I think all of that is quite helpful to do. And then the other stages, I'd say, you know, frankly, all of these conferences, the most useful thing you're going to get out of them is talking to people face to face and meeting investors and, you know, checking out competitors and understanding ecosystem providers. And this, sorry, side note, is a truly global conference. So it is in Europe, and most of the people there will be based in Europe. But there are investors and companies from the US that come, and, you know, obviously yourselves coming from Australia, there are people from all over the world. So, you know, just to be aware of that. It's a really big place. There's hundreds, probably thousands now of people there. There's a lot of different stands with different service companies. All of the kind of deep tech pioneers have got a little stand. And again, it's worth taking time just to walk around those, just check out the competition. And they're all really interesting, even if they're not, you know, roughly half of the companies are kind of medical and roughly half are climate-y. And they're all deep tech, so they're all interesting, even if they're not kind of directly relevant to you. And then some kind of boring logistical things. It's advised by lunch in advance. I would advise that, because again, if you don't, then you kind of stuck in a massive queue for the meal trucks on the day, and there's no breakfast provided. So just be prepared. Then meeting investors, again, arrange it all through the app. There is a dedicated meeting space, like 2 rooms. With coffee, good news, and like lots of little tables with numbers on. So when you arrange to meet somebody, you can kind of book a table, or you can, you know, say let's meet in the meeting space and then agree a table number on the day. But that helps with meeting up. Cool. Any questions specifically about the Hello Tomorrow? Cool. And then I had some kind of general points about, side events, which I've just seen today that you guys are doing a side event earlier in the week. So that's cool. But these are some of the kind of more notable side events with registration links. A lot of them are full and say waitlist only, but, you know, just put these up here to see what magic Olivia can wangle. And then general advice on kind of talking to investors, which I'm sure a lot of you have got a lot of experience on. So, you know, please, you know, take this in the spirits of trying to be helpful, but this is advice that I'm also giving to people based over here, based anywhere, just really about the times that we're currently in, that really clarity is the most important thing to focus on. So specifically for you guys coming here from Australia, I think make some time to build your story and really practice it. So as you know, investors tend to focus on where they are based, right? And they will probably have a clearly defined geography that they invest in. And that is not going to be something they can negotiate, probably. So like we can only invest in companies headquartered in Europe. So there's no point in coming to us and saying, oh, well, we're planning to set up an operation in Spain next year, because that's just, we still can't invest in you. So we just can't. So we're not going to be able to change our mind about that. So the first thing to ask is really just to check, what geography an investor covers, and just see if there's a potential fit there. So if it's possible to have a local investor on board, even if they're small, that will really help with international credibility. Because if I have a company come to me from the US and they're looking for investment in from us, well, my first question is, why on earth haven't you got a local fund to invest in you? Because there's plenty of capital in the US, right? So why have you spoken to every investor in the US and they've all said no? Because that's not a great look. So be really clear, why are you looking for capital outside of Australia? So really have a good story about the potential market for you, or the operational constraints, or the regulatory preferences, or whatever is relevant for your business. Make sure you've got a clear reason why you're looking for investors in Europe, and it's not that you just ran out of investors in Australia. It is reasonable to say, perhaps there's a smaller VC pool in your local market, and so perhaps you haven't been able to find enough focus who are investors who are focused on your particular type of technology. But if you can find a local investor who is supporting you, that will really help with your story. And the kind of local, domestic support, like the kind of support you're getting from Climate Salad, and anything else you've got, like universities or awards or any kind of traction that will kind of support your story, is very helpful. You are likely to hear, I don't invest in Australia. So I've got some kind of suggested responses here. Just make sure you get the most out of every conversation. So ask them, like, who do you know that invests globally? Like, make it sound cool. Make it sound like they're missing out. People are likely to say next, right, I don't know anything about Australia. I don't have a network there. How can I help? I'm not going to be able to help you there. Would have to have a really high bar to invest in Australia. So make sure you're clear on that. Like, you've got the local knowledge. You don't need them to have a local network. What you're looking for is the European connections, or what it is you're looking for. People are likely to think that, forgive me, Australia might not have a very sophisticated climate tech scene. So be ready to say, right, no, there's all these investors, there's all these programs. We've got some really successful companies in this space that you've probably heard of. I just put down one that I have heard of there, but have some good examples there of successful climate tech companies from Australia, and that will really help with the kind of, oh yes, oh yeah, okay. Obviously there are good universities and good investors and good government support, and there's really positive winds of change that will mean that the climate tech scene is flourishing there. The other thing you're likely to hear is people comparing you to European or US competitors. So they'll say, how are you different from X? So again, make sure you know all of the X's, like who are the European competitors that you are likely to get put in the same bucket as, and be really crystal clear on why you are different. And if you're not different, that's also okay. Just be clear about it. Say, oh yeah, well, our technology is very similar to X's, but we are able to access these commercial markets, or just have a clear point of differentiation. We're 3 years ahead of them. We have a patent, whatever it is. Cool. Any questions?
Yep. Can I ask, do you think it's clearer when I say I'm a prop tech, clean tech solution? Because I mean, like, the intro was really convoluted. So I think people don't necessarily understand the technical deviations I go into, because some people are big tech, climate tech, some people are systems interface or plant.
Yeah, I think
facades,
you're right. Being really clear is important. The investors are probably going to be quite sophisticated. They're all ones who've chosen to come to a deep tech conference. So you should assume that they're going to be interested in deep tech, full stop. So I think, if you can have a sentence that is really clear about what you do. So I think from memory, it was like modular power energy storage.
Yes, that's exactly it. And it can be in the form of prop tech as well. So you got it.
Yeah, exactly. So I think if they're, that's great. That means you can kind of target the prop tech investors. But I think, if you just say what it is you're doing, then it should be clear that it applies to property and climate and to deep tech. So just say that it's modular energy storage that is going to solve this problem. Cool. And then I had some like more general, non-specific to Australia or Hello Tomorrow, but specific to the times we're in kind of tips. So we've talked about this a little bit, but the first thing to do is ask if it's in scope. So again, don't waste everybody's time. Is this the kind of company you're interested in investing in? Is a really useful phrase to have up your sleeve. I learned this the hard way. A lot of people don't appreciate that VCs have to raise their funds as well. So, we've done a lot of fundraising ourselves over the last couple of years, and it's been brutal. And I wasted a lot of time talking to LPs who were just not ready to invest or not ever going to invest in what we were doing. So, be really specific, like understand why people are likely to say no to you. So for us, it's because we were an emerging manager. We are focused on hard tech. We're focused on pre-seed. And all of those are reasons why people say no to us. So understand what the objections are likely to be to your business and just say, oh, do you invest in hard tech? Do you invest in energy solutions? Do you invest in consumer facing solutions? Those are things that are likely to rule you out from somebody's investment thesis straight off. If they say yes, great. Ask them if they're likely to, if they prefer to lead, how long their decision-making process is, what their likely check size is. Get the commitment consistency going. So that's really, but if they say no, obviously just ask them if they know anybody for whom it would be in scope. In general, I advise not to ask for actual introductions because investors tend to only introduce companies that they know and can vouch for to some extent. But at least if they tell you the name of a VC, you can go and look them up and track them down. Then the second thing is a lot of people don't actually have any money right now, right? They are themselves raising their funds. They're between funds. They're at the end of their fund life cycle, so they've only got one ticket left, or they've got to invest in this kind of thing because to balance out the rest of their portfolio. So just make sure they can, even if this is in scope for them, make sure they can actually invest right now or within the next 6 months. So are you currently making investments? And it's okay to ask this. And again, this took me a long time to kind of get comfortable with, but it's actually, I think, appreciated by a VC to show that you know how things work, and that you're asking them to be clear. And if they say, no, we're currently between funds, then, ask them when they're going to be back in the market and get back in touch then, but don't waste any more time on them. So then, traction. So traction has always been king. Everybody wants to see that, first of all, that you've got a brilliant technology. Secondly, that it works. And that's kind of pre-seed story. And then as soon as you get into the seed world, you need to know that who your customer is, and really have spent some time working that out, and talking to them and getting that validation. And then you need to show that they really do want it. So, you might be very early stage, you might be already, Series A or beyond, but whatever is appropriate to your stage, give as much evidence that you can, that your customers, that you know who your customers are and that they want your thing. So letters of intent are nice, contracts are better. So memorandums of understanding, joint development agreements, purchase commitments, whatever it is, try and have something that you can wave to show that you are wanted. And to stay really focused. This is difficult advice because I think a lot of companies get distracted right now into applying for grants or doing consultancy projects that will give them a bit of cash and extend the runway. And you might need to do that at some point. So I'm not saying never do that, but on the whole, try and keep your focus. So don't get distracted in doing things that won't really de-risk your next milestone. So because it won't increase your valuation, it won't increase your probability of getting VC investment. Related to that, be ready to extend your runway. So as we talked about earlier, everything's taking longer. So it's taking, where it might have taken a few months to do around 3-4 years ago, it's now taking 6 months to a year. So you don't want to be in a situation where you've got a term sheet with somebody and then it takes 4 or 5 months to close the round, which happens sadly. So just be ready to extend if you need to. So get creative. What can you share, borrow, hire? Do as much as you can with the least amount of money that enables you to still grow quickly, which is a very difficult trade-off to get to. And yeah, get as much non-dilutive capital as you can. Then first of a kind. So a lot of you will need to think about this as well. So 2023 was the year that everybody talked about folk and what to do. And this is the year that I think people are getting really serious about doing something about it. So there's a lot of new funds, new loan programs, new blended finance programs, all kinds of stuff going on, but everybody's talking about folk. So make sure you have a clear path to get your product to market in terms of how you're actually going to make it. It's good idea to have advisors who are experts on in this particular space, and ideally to have like costed plans. So if you can find some consultant or a design consultancy, engineering consultancy, whatever's relevant for your product, who can for a relatively small outlay help you have something that looks very credible in terms of, right, I know how I'm going to make this thing. For some of you, it'll be the right solution to form a partnership with somebody, joint ventures, contract manufacturing, hiring people, or maybe you do it yourself, in which case you need to, in both cases, you need to think how you're going to finance it. So lots of different options. I'm not going to go into loads of detail here, but happy to chat with anybody about all of this. The guiding kind of constraints being to try and keep as much control over your product and try and hold on to as much of the value creation as possible. And then another topic that comes up a lot is whether you should take money from corporates. So I think in the old world we used to say that you should hold off until Series A, and then if you get a big company involved earlier on, it's generally not a good idea because they take forever to do anything, and they might have incentives that you don't fully understand. Like, are they trying to acquire you? Are they trying to take your IP? Will having money from this person mean you can't take money from this other person at the next round, or have that person as your customer because they're worried about the conflict? So it just makes the picture very muddy indeed. Generally as well, they are not as credible in terms of setting valuations, so that can be an issue if you take money early on. However, I think the world has changed a lot. Corporates are going earlier and earlier. They're going into seed and even pre-seed rounds in search of innovation and competitive advantage. And I think you need to kind of educate yourself about the risks of taking investment from corporates early on. So really understand what their motives are. Are they interested in you as a customer, as an operational partner, or as a potential acquirer? It might be all three, but really understand why they're investing in you. How active do they want to be? Like, how much control are they going to want to have over your company? What do they want from you? And understand any reputational risks. If you're taking money from big oil or somebody else controversial, that might be something you really need to think through and have a clear story about why you think they're a good partner for you. Cool. So that was kind of general advice. We have a whistle stop to. I've put some QR codes here for linking on LinkedIn and WhatsApp and my email. So feel free to reach out before coming to Paris or while you're there, and it'd be great to meet up with you there and see how you're all getting along.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Pippa, and love the tips on chatting to investors and how to navigate that. Investors talk to hundreds of founders, and so really finding that way to make your value proposition really clear and really compelling is super important, especially when we're coming over from Australia. Mindful of time, I think let's jump straight into Stuart's presentation, and any questions we can dive into them at the end, or Pippa's very generously given out her contact details as well. So if there's anything more specific to just your business, reach out via me or directly to Pippa. Stuart, I think you're muted.
Yeah, no, that's okay. I'm just trying to get the presentation up.
Love it. We can see that.
Is that in presentation mode?
I'm not sure it's quite, we can see the next slide on the right. So it's giving us a little preview of the next one, but it's clear enough.
I'll try that again. Just screen 2. Share. How does that look? Is that the whole slide?
That's great.
Cool. Okay. Okay. So hopefully you can see the raising funds in Europe. What we'll cover today, a bit of a table of contents. Look, a little bit conscious of time, and Olivia, rather than going around the houses, which what we normally do, maybe if you know, let us know what stage of growth are people doing. Have they been through fundraising before? Are we talking about mainly seed stage companies, Series A, or is it a broad church?
I think it's mainly seed stage, pre-seed seed. But if everyone wants to pop their stage in the chat, that could be useful. But I think it's skewed towards the earlier conversations.
Okay, good. Which is perfectly fine, and it just helps me kind of calibrate the level. So if people are at seed stage and they're looking to raise that, it might be the first time they've raised money from professional investors, which, as Pippa said, VC funds, dedicated CVCs, which is just corporate venture capital, so much jargon here, or other investors. So I thought what would be useful is, and to set the scene, I'm an Australian lawyer, so I would typically help Australian companies raise funds, or I would help domestic investors or overseas investors invest in Australian companies. So in my practice, most of the investors in Australia are domestic, so it's usually not international, but I do act for a range of VC funds in Europe, London, Asia, and the US. So I think we do all the work for Sequoia Capital, who you may have heard of. They're rebranded or split up their divisions to now Peak 15 in Asia Pac. Horizons Ventures, which invest directly in companies, but they're one of the biggest LPs in Main Sequence, the CSIRO co-funded deep tech fund. I recently completed a quantum computing deal out of a French deep tech quantum computing fund. We act for Agronomics, a listed ag tech fund out of the UK. So I'm really blessed in that I see all Australian deals, but I see the expectations from Australian investors, Asian, US, continental Europeans, and the British investors. And Francois, obviously practicing in Paris for 25 years through sort of 2 macro VC cycles, sees all of that as well with a far more European perspective. So I'll run through the investment process, which might be interesting to you, the stages of fundraising that we see, some of the issues around re-domiciling. You might get asked to actually move your company over to Europe and what that means. Some key features in the term sheet with focusing on what the difference we see between Australia investor expectations and European investor expectations, what the diligence process is like if you haven't been through one of those before. We'll touch briefly on some of the security terms. Are you issuing shares, preference shares, safe notes, convertibles, something else? And if you thought the intro was jargony, just wait till you get to that. It's a treasure trove. Some of the minority shareholder protections, which is kind of like the key terms of the investment other than the price. And then for people in this room, particularly some of the founder entrenchment arrangements, which we see. So how founders want to put skin in the game. We may not get through all of it. If there's anything I say or Francois says that doesn't make sense, is different to what you've heard, or is just flat out jargon, and you feel a little bit sheepish for not knowing off the top of your head all of these sort of technical and made up terms, please just say, hey, what do you mean by that? Is that different to this? Is it the same as this? It'll make it far more interesting for you and for me, the more interaction it is. And being a lawyer, I obviously love the sound of my own voice, but I would prefer to hear from you along the way. And Francois will contribute as we go through. So without further ado, we could just do the whole presentation on this slide, but I'll try to keep it more interesting. So typically, how the investment process will work, this is it from a legal perspective. This is the easy bit. The hard bit is you going out, meeting investors, doing your IM, pitching, all the hard work that Pippa says, and then you get a fish on the hook. You get an investor who says, Julie, this sounds great. I'd love to invest. What do I do now? Right? So you've sort of got them over that initial investment decision. They want to invest. How does it work? And this is where the legal process really kicks off. The first thing we do is usually sign a term sheet that's 2 to 3 pages that has the key terms of the transaction that you'd like to invest in. That's non-binding, but in my experience, over 99% of deals move to binding documents once you've got a term sheet. Investors are just not in the habit of signing a term sheet unless they fully intend to close. Right? So that's the first document you'll sign. The good news is you've got a signed document. The bad news is it's not binding. And we've got a whole slide on what the terms are. But I'll give you a preview. It says how much money they're investing and what value they attribute to the company before they invest, right? So if they value the company at 9 million and they're investing 1 million, then they get 10%. It gets a lot more complicated than that, but that's the key thing. How much are they investing and what are they valuing in the company? And from there, you can back out what percentage of the company you get and how much you'll be diluted. Then there's everything else, which we'll talk about, all the legal terms. The number one thing is how much they're investing in the value, and the other thing are all the legal terms, which we'll come to. You should look to sign a term sheet as quickly as possible. 1 day would be super quick, 2 days would be super quick. Any more than a week, I'm thinking, gosh, this is taking a long time to sign a term sheet. If there's one bit of advice I would give you in this whole presentation, it would be seek legal or other expert advice before signing a term sheet. That it's going to be packed with jargon, packed with standard terms and non-standard terms, and to decipher what's standard and what's acceptable and to decipher what's not takes someone that does these all day, every day. So there's a lot of lawyer hours and money you'll probably spend in getting this done, but the 45 minutes for a legal review of a term sheet, and then maybe the other, over the course of a week, 2 or 3 hours negotiating it, would be the best money you'll ever spend on a professional advisor, because once it's in there, they've taken that to their IC, they've got it approved on that terms, and going back to their IC saying we didn't get to do this needs a really good reason, and the founder didn't understand it is not one of those good reasons. Okay, so you got your term sheet. Now what do you do? Now all the documents and the diligence starts. So after you sign the term sheet, then the investor will want to do confirmatory DD, and we'll talk about what that is. That'll take around 4 to 8 weeks, depending on the stage and complexity of your business. During those 4 to 8 weeks, the lawyers will draft the documents, which is a subscription agreement that says they agree to pay the money and you agree to issue the securities. They'll draft the securities if they're not in existence. If it's ordinary shares, it's nothing. And then there will be an amendment to your shareholders agreement that gives them the board appointment right and the other terms. That usually takes 4 to 8 weeks. So you sign the term sheet. 4 to 8 weeks later, if diligence has gone well, you'll have the documents drafted, and then you will sign binding transaction documents, roughly 1 to 2 months after you've signed the term sheet. That is your first binding commitment for the investor to invest. After you've signed the documents, there's usually a 1 to 2 week period where you'll get shareholder approvals or other conditions. Usually there's not many. Once those conditions are satisfied, you will tell the investor that conditions are satisfied. They will generally need 1 to 2 weeks to notify their own investors that they need some money. And that's called a capital call to close the round. So sign term sheet, 8 weeks later, sign legally binding documents. 2 to 4 weeks later, you get your money. Then there's a 5. If you're investing with a strategic investor, and I just meant strategic, it's just a corporate or some non-VC investor, there might be some strategic partnership agreements, some customer agreements or collaboration agreements, and that's really for corporate venture capital. So does that resonate with people? So it's sort of a 2 to 3 month process. I've done Series C and D where you're raising north of $100 million. There might be a consortium of investors that takes longer, but for a seed or a Series A, we've got one lead investor setting the terms, you're negotiating with one person. Other investors, which are called follow-on investors, might invest on the same terms. So you might raise $1.5 million, $1 million from the lead investor, $250,000 from your existing shareholders, and $250,000 from other investors. They should generally be pretty quiet, wait for the agreed form transaction documents, and then sign and close. They shouldn't really be too involved with the negotiation. Does that all make sense? So Julie, you got your hand up?
Yeah, thanks. I've got 2 questions. One is an example of the rigor or rigmarole of due diligence, and how do we make sure that we are as tightly prepared for that process as possible? And the second question's in relation to VC versus joint venture and co-investment sort of opportunities with your potential value chain partners.
Sure. I love a question about diligence. How can you be most prepared for diligence? Being prepared for diligence is great because the investor goes, boy, these guys are organized. They're slick. They've got everything done. And what does that mean? I'd say there are 2 key ways you can do that. Set up a data room. So have all your corporate documents in one folder, your certificate of incorporation, your shareholders register, the minutes of your board meetings, the minutes of your shareholders meetings, not too many. Having your key supplier agreements, it could be something as simple as your lease, your AWS account, and a few other things. Having your key customer agreements, if you've got customers, in one folder, your template terms and your top 5 or 10 customers is generally all people look at. Having all your employment agreements in one folder, all your signed documents named. Having any key IP documents there. The fact that you own your URL, the fact that you own your business name, your register of trademarks, and if you've employed any contractors to work on the IP, you've got the contracts for the IP there. So having that up in a data room, I've just said that in 2 minutes, but if you have all the documents set up, even of those, then you're ahead of 75% of the curve. But if you want to be at the top of the class, and I can tell, Julie, you do, because you're already asking questions about how to be organized for DD, you can ask your lawyer, hey, if you were acting for an investor, what due diligence questionnaire would you give? So your lawyer can send you an investor due diligence questionnaire, which you can answer and upload to your data room. And that will be, when were you incorporated, provide a structure chart, provide a description of what each entity does. This holds the IP, that's the parent co, that runs the French operations, Put a copy of your shareholders agreement in the data room. Are there any related party transactions? No, just our employment agreements. Who are your top 10 suppliers? Who are your top 10 customers? What is the revenue breakdown for those? Do you have any patents? No, we don't. Are there any disputes? No, we don't. Do you have a license? Not at the moment. We're applying for one. Have you received any government grants? See folder 7 of the data room. So if you put that up there, that'll save them money doing it. And if you've got multiple investors looking through your data room, 1, you already look organized. 2, you've cut down their search time so they can move through the diligence process quickly. If you're one of the 99% of founders who wants this process to be accelerated and move more quickly than your conservative lawyers tell you is reasonable, then you can go a long way to that by having your data room set up and having a DDQ done, and then it's only confirmatory RFIs or requests for information, or in plain speak, questions as part of that diligence process. I would say less than 1 in 20 would do that, but it would be terrific to do it. If you're doing a Series C or D and you're raising 50, 100, 200 million, paying a law firm 100, 150 grand to write a due diligence report on you. So the diligence is done. I closed a $100 million Series C round for the lead investor in December, and the company had their lawyers do the DD for the investors, put it in the data room, because they had 10 investors in that $100 million round, and they didn't want, they were just trying to screw the legal fraternity out of having 10 investors do 10 DD reports on the same property. It's kind of like if you're selling your apartment, you get the building inspection report done once and you make it available for sellers. But that is not expected at seed A or B. Like, it's just too much of a financial impost on the target, on the portfolio company or the issuer company.
But usually at this stage, maybe Stuart, we can specify that at this stage, there will be a lead investor that will be taking care of picking a lawyer and making sure that there is a due diligence exercise that is completed and that he will be able to share with the other investors of the same round, A or B.
That's exactly right. So typically, the lead investor will sign the term sheet, and the lead investor just means the investor who signs the term sheet, who's putting in most of the money. And because they've signed the term sheet, they've set the price of the round, right? And then they do the diligence, as Francois said. They negotiate the documents, and the follow-on investors who want to invest in the round on the same terms just contribute money. And if they're obedient, which they're not always, they just sign the documents when you ask them to nicely.
In particular, in this market where fundraising is more difficult than it was a year ago, than as we explained earlier, it's quite typical to have rounds that will be open for a certain period of time. So the lead investor will be at least the one setting the round in motion by committing first, which doesn't mean that it will be at the end the largest shareholder, but at least he will have set up in motion that round, agreed on the price, completed the due diligence, and then the round will remain open for a certain period of time on the same terms and conditions so that other investors could join.
And that is exactly that we see the exact same thing here in Australia, Francois. So the round, yeah, it's just you let other people come in after closing, provided it's on no better terms.
Exactly.
Any questions on that? We try not to spend the whole session on the one slide, as sexy as it is with the grey and one colour. But any other questions on that? Good. Okay.
Well, there's one data room question in the chat, but I think, Stuart, let's leave it for last, and because there's so much good stuff in the presentation.
Okay. Well, there's another slide on DD. I don't want to give it away, but we'll be able to discuss diligence more because we're lawyers. So the stages of fundraising, I won't dwell on this, but I might ask Francois for some of his perspectives on the state of the European market, which you're going into. But just generally, seed stage funding is generally early funding to develop the product. So you might have a really good idea. You may have raised some funds from pre-seed or angels, and you really want to develop the product into something you can take to market. Series A is usually led by an institutional investor, like we've said, a corporate or a venture capital fund, and it's really to take the product to market to expand growth. But investors there will typically want to see ballpark, $500,000 or more annual revenue. So you've actually got a product in the market, it's selling, it's got some traction, but you want to develop it further. Series B and beyond is really scale up. Like you're taking the product, you've already got good traction, and you might want to take it to Europe, for example, or you need funds to expand into the US, or you've got a really good product and you want to move into a different product area, right, to move. And then eventually we've got IPOs. The last IPO I did was September 21, and I worked on none in 2022, and I had 3 be withdrawn from market last year. So the equity markets have been very, very quiet. If you read the Australian Financial Review, you see there's like 20 companies in the pipeline. You may have heard of this like tiny little company called Canva, which the AFR have some kind of obligation to write at least one article around every week. That sort of has been struggling to get away, that they might move to the US. In Australia, there seems to be a lot of money out there, more than I've ever seen, for seed stage. Some of the big blue chip VCs have raised seed funding. 3 years ago, they were like, we only want you if you're Series A or B and you're going to be a unicorn, right? Product in market, traction, investing just for the hockey stick. The mood now is far more, we don't want to miss out on the next unicorn. And they're sort of placing these $1 and $2 million bets rather generously around the market. How that'll play out in 12 months with all these companies getting $1 million and potentially running out of money, I don't know. Series A, we're starting to see a strong flow come back, but there haven't been many companies doing Series B and beyond. I think I did 2 in December for between 30 and 50 million. And then I did 2 Series C in December, but that was really only the last quarter coming back. We're starting to see people, if you're going to raise 30, $50 million, you really want a solid pre-money val. Otherwise, it'd be way too much dilution, which is why Series B and beyond was basically evaporated from the market in 2022, because if you just wouldn't raise that much money in such poor markets because you'd be diluted, you might just raise a quarter of the money, just enough to see you through the next 12 months and come stick your head out above the pulpit to see if the market had changed. Francois, I'd be interested in your thoughts as to what you're seeing in France and continental Europe in terms of the stage of the market at different life cycles within the stages of growth.
Actually, as Pippa said, generally speaking, the market has gone quieter than it was during the past 2 years. The IPO market is definitely very quieter. I haven't done any IPO during the past 2 years. So we are focusing more in respect of listed companies on follow-on capital raise or non-dilutive funding resources. And a lot of them, by the way, in Europe being heavily public subsidized, so either by the French state or by the EU. But there's a lot of money available in that space. And that type of non-dilutive financing being more available for Series B or Series C companies, less for the less mature companies, much less. And regarding, so getting back to the equity raise, it's really a market where, even though generally speaking, the market is quieter, I think there's a lot of traction right now. And the hot topics like AI companies do not look like they have any problem in capital raising, and in climate change as well. Energy transition, generally speaking, is also very attractive for investors. And I have a couple of case studies I can tell you about, and they are raising a lot of attention, and companies, this type of companies are less struggling than biotech companies, for example. Life science space being very much more affected by the slowdown than these climate tech companies.
Yeah, that's a good point, Francois. Just on that, I spoke about the stages of funding. You're speaking more accurately, more relevantly on the sector. The same is true for Australia. So we look at which institutions are raising funds to deploy. It's obviously the leading indicator. And I think in Australia, we've seen a large amount of funds raised by funds or other investors with a mandate to invest in climate tech generally. So Pollination has raised funds, Wallamai Capital. Tim Bishop was the head of Macquarie Capital. He set up his own fund focused on that. You don't leave being the managing director of Macquarie Capital without a pretty good reason. Speaking of Macquarie, they've got the Green Investment Group, which invests globally. North Harbour Clean Energy, another one of our clients, has raised funds from super funds to deploy in that space. You'll have read in the press that earlier, not this month, last month, we're in March now, CEFC, the Clean Energy Finance Corp's venture fund, Virescent, just closed a $200 million round. And then we're starting to see some of the family offices or, uber high net worth with a real focus on energy transition and climate tech. So Wedgetail, one of the Canberra co-founders, Grok, Mike Cannon-Brookes, the Atlassian founder, his investment office, Grok, invest purely in that space. Skip Capital, which is Kim Jackson's sort of run fund, and her husband is Scott Farquhar. They invest pretty heavily in that space. So I sort of just rolled off almost 10 investors who don't exclusively invest in that space, but predominantly. And I think if you added up the capital there in Australia, that's a couple $1 billion. So that's a lot of sort of seed and Series A checks. Some of them will be investing in larger developments, so electrolyzer plants, hydrogen, battery storage, power cells, which are obviously more CapEx heavy than pure play tech. But I think the message is a lot of capital has been raised in the last 18 months to deploy in this sector. So we are, as a firm, expecting to see a large amount of capital deployment in that. It won't all be in Australia, but a lot of it will be.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in there and say, I for all this doom and gloom about how depressed like 2023 was, there's a genuine feeling of optimism, I think, kicking off 2024. I think everybody's, there's a lot of dry powder out there, and I think most VCs are just ready to get going, and we're seeing really excellent deal flow at the moment, like lots of really cool companies coming through. So, I think that Hello Tomorrow and more broadly your trip to Paris is really well timed to try and like kind of surf that wave of kind of, right, everybody's done with, depression and ready to kind of get going again.
Very good. Yeah, so that was I think an excellent market snapshot from Pippa and Francois. So that's hopefully some good news there. Redomicile, boy, that's an interesting bit of jargon. Sometimes we see European investors, less so than say the US, say, why don't you come over here? The French way of life is amazing. The wine leaves Australia for dead, and don't even get me started on the cheese and the pastries, right? Like, it's just a better way of life. Why don't you come over here? There's a bigger market, more favorable funding. You will do so well over here. Why don't you come and stay? And then you think, well, what does this mean? Right? What does it even practically mean, and should I do it? So the European investors will be more accustomed to investing in European companies. They're a little less xenophobic than our American friends who think that 99 or maybe 150% of world commerce goes on in America, but that's probably just George Bush. So what this means in practical terms is moving your parent company into the US. Now, while there are very, very, very limited ways when a company can move jurisdictions, like a person can, what this means is leaving your Australian company in Australia, establishing a new company in a European jurisdiction. That company in Europe buys out all your shareholders in the Australian company in return for shares. So if I'm a 15% shareholder in one of your companies in the Australian company, the new European company buys my shares off me, and I get 15% in the European company. So the European company is the parent company, and then it owns 100% of the Australian and other companies, and all of your shareholders end up owning shares in the new European company. That is called a top hat restructure or a flip up. It just means you're putting a European company as the top company on top of your corporate group. So you need all of your shareholders to agree to that and to sign a document swapping their Australian shares for the European shares. So that is how to move. Tax, you need to make sure if you're selling a share that your Australian investors aren't left with a tax problem, because the ATO will say, well, you sold your shares for something of value, please pay us tax if that's worth more. So you need to make sure you can structure that for what's called script for script rollover relief. So you need some tax advice. And you may need to share that tax advice with your investors. What about the ESOP? You don't want the ESOP at the Australian level if your parent company is over in Europe. So you need to unwind that and then move that up to the parent company and put in place a European ESOP that somehow applies to your global staff, possibly in Australia. So why move? Why would you go through the pain of restructuring the group, telling your investors about it, getting tax advice, and then pulling apart your ESOP and putting it back together again? You would need a really good reason to go to all that expense. The only reason I would do it is if you were moving there anyway and a European investor would do it, and they require it, they've got a mandate, I'm going to give you more money than you can dream of, but my mandate says I can only invest in European companies. So if you want my money, you need to come here, right? Otherwise, it's a lot of hassle to do that. And then, okay, no, look, no one else is investing. These investors investing, they're giving me a lot of money at a great price, and I want to come to Europe anyway. When do you do it? Let's go back. We signed the term sheet too early, not binding. They're doing diligence. Too early, they might pull out. Then they sign the transaction documents. Great. They've signed the transaction documents. Remember, I said between transaction documents and closing, there are conditions. One of the conditions would be that you re-domicile to insert name of European jurisdiction. It's too uncertain around here to go to all that time and expense. You can start working on it, but you only want to do it after you have a legally binding commitment and they've locked in. Then you do the restructure agreement, you get the tax, and then you work out what to do with the ESOP. Has anyone been approached or have any experience with European or other investors wanting them to re-domicile?
No.
One of the key reasons, one of the key reasons for companies like yours to contemplate redomiciling to the EU is really to get in a position where you will be able to access public subsidies. So that's a key driver for some of them. Or key subsidies are public procurement opportunities. Public subsidies being, as I said earlier, provided in France locally by French state, by French administrations, also by French cities or regions, and on a more global, larger scale, the EU through the European Investment Fund provide quite a lot of non-public, non-dilutive and dilutive fundings. So both of them are quite attractive. And there's also, beyond this public funding, there's also this environment where you have, at least in France, a lot of tax credits that you can monetize, and that tax credits being calculated on the basis of the R&D spending you have. Like if you have a dozen of engineers working full-time on the development of your product or solution, the total amount of their wages would generate tax credit that you could that you can monetize on a yearly basis. So that's quite also attractive for some of your competitors that have decided at some stage to relocate in Europe.
Quick question, Francois. Why can't you just establish a company in the EU and then just give the license to operate? Like, why would they need you to flip when you can potentially license parallel, like legally, like in the business chart, the subsidiary is like not formally established, but you have an agreement with the regional corporations.
But at least that would imply that you would not flipping the entire company, but at least creating like a subsidiary within the EU and hiring employees locally. So with that, that would be like a partial flip somehow, because basically you would hire employees within the EU instead of hiring them in Australia, and you would be able then to apply for the tax credit up to the amount of the wages in engineers that you would have spent within the EU, or at least within France.
So
That's
if
true.
you actually
That would
then
work.
are an Australian business that owns like subsidiaries to whatever context, but then if you establish companies in each other country or continent, then technically
at least one of them.
Yeah.
You don't need to establish one subsidiary in each of the 27 EU countries. That's good
No,
news.
yeah.
But at least in one of them. Yes. And pick up Paris, definitely.
Yeah.
That would be more convenient for attending a tomorrow every year.
Good. But look, far and away, the more efficient way to do it, Julie, that we see would be to establish a subsidiary in a jurisdiction rather than flipping up the parent co. I guess as an overarching comment, I would say, remember I said the hardest bit is getting the investor across the precipice to decide to invest. And now we're just talking about the terms. If they really want to invest in your company, then they probably will, unless they've got a mandate. So, going back to Pippa's direct questions, which were fantastic. If they say you really should come to Europe, it would be great if you're here. It would make it easier for us to invest. You might say, we're happy to set up a subsidiary here to do boots on ground and expand. Is it a fund or mandate requirement that we flip the parent company up? Is it a requirement? Is it in your mandate? Do we have to? Right? Kind of like a police officer says, would you like to join me down at the station? So I'd love to, officer, but do I have to? Really just sort of test that out in the politest possible way. Because if they're keen to invest, they should be keen to invest in you, your business, the technology and the team. And, as important as legal details are, it should be a detail.
Yeah, I would completely agree with that. I think most funds can make an exception. So, they might prefer for you to be based locally, or that's going to be easier for them, but they probably can. So the most important thing is to get them excited about you, and then everything else will flow from there.
I'll give you an example. In Australia, the tax concession for the venture capital funds called VCLPs or ESVCLPs are allowed to deploy up to 20% of their fund into foreign companies. So if they can do it in Australia, they'd be like, oh, you should, we'd love you to. Why don't you come here? They don't want to use up that capacity for their exception that Pippa said. So I'm not sure for every different European jurisdiction, but it's often things like that. Now, look, it's sort of on the half hour, so we might sort of go through this and go through these key terms, because the rest of the slides tend to go in just a bit more detail than the rest of it. But in terms of the term sheet, and these fill through the remainder of the document, the key thing is sort of how much money they're investing and what is the valuation. From there, you can back out the dilution. The next thing is the security or the instrument. Now, I'm interested in Francois' perspective on this. In Australia, for a full round, preference shares are ubiquitous. Now, they're exactly the same as an ordinary share, except for two features. One, if there's a sale of the business or an exit below the valuation, then investors get their money back first, right? So go back to my example. I invest $1 million into a company with a pre-money valuation of 9 million, and I've got 10%. A liquidation preference is basically saying my cash is worth more than your sweat equity. And a liquidation preference can be 1 times, I get 1 times my money back, or 2 times or 3 times. In Australia, it's always 1 times. And participating or not participating. In Australia, it's always not participating, which means I can choose between one of the following 2 on exit. I can choose to get my $1 million back on an exit, or I can choose to take my 10%. Now, that feature is there because investing in early stage companies and valuing them is definitely an art. It's got very little to do with science. So no one knows how much your company is worth at a seed stage. Let's call it 9. But it could be worth 1 or 5, right? Who knows? But look, I don't want to dilute you guys. I'm a nice investor. I'm from the venture capital community, so I left my halo at home today, but I'm really here to save the world. And I'm not quite a god, but I'm God's gift to this community. So because I'm so nice, I'm just going to call it 9 and take 10%. But if I'm wrong and the business goes sideways and we sell the business for anything less than 10 million, will it make sense for me to take my $1 million back or my 10%? Obviously, it makes sense for me to take my $1 million back. But if I'm half as smart as I say I am, and the company sells for 100 million, then I can take my 1 million or my 10%. So it's a legal mechanism to mitigate investor risk, which takes the pressure off somewhat of the valuation. Now, if the company goes well, which hopefully it does, then it does matter what I invest in because 10% the maximum I've got, right? But if it goes sideways or down, I can take my $1 million back. But often these companies will go down close to zero, so I'm still at risk of losing my money. It's not a fail-safe, but that's an important thing. And if investors are going into something really risky or desperate, they might say, well, I want double my money back, which is a 2x liquidation preference. So in my example, I can choose 2 million or 10%. So it means the exit valuation doubles to 20 million before I would ever take my 10%. Below that level, you're suffering more than 10% dilution. Now, what we do see is nasty is participating, which means I get to have my cake and eat it too. I get my $1 million back and 10%. So there's a lot of jargon. Liquidation preference, I get a preference over you in a liquidation or a sale. 1x, how many times money back I get in that choice. Participating or not participating. Not participating, I have to choose my money or my percentage. And participating, I get my money and my percentage. But it's really important at the term sheet stage that you know all of this and you model it out, because if they go, oh no, that's just jargon, they're preference shares, they're standard, that can cost you millions of dollars or tens of millions of dollars if you get that wrong, right? So in Australia, 99% plus would be preference shares with a 1x non-participating liquidation preference, unless the company's really in danger. Francois, do you see a little bit more variation to that standard set of terms in preference shares? I know with my European investors, they ask me all the time, how far can they push it? And I'll just say you'll be really off market if you do anything other than that.
No, it's we are more or less quite close to this practice. There's always obviously discussion regarding the terms of the pref. I would say that the market practice being like for seed and Series A, your negotiation position is not as good, so you would probably accept the participating liquidation preference, whereas when you improve your level of maturity and you reach Series B, non-participating would be more customary. But it's always a question of negotiation and how strong is the competition among investors to get into your equity round.
Yeah, so I mean, that's an excellent reason to hire a good lawyer to do the negotiation for you, because it'll save you millions in the long term. So I couldn't have said that more clearly myself, Francois. That was excellent the way you weave that in. Then we come to the board seat. The lead investor in each round will typically want board representation. Now, my philosophy on this, and this is the same whether I'm acting for an investor or a company, is the company should be controlled by the founder for day-to-day matters, and investors should be able to veto the reserve matter regime, which is anything that's fundamentally important to the business, like doing a big M&A deal, or could be dilutive, like doing a non-pro rata issuance of securities. Not everyday matters like hiring and firing, commercial contracts, signing the lease, business development, even issuing shares on a pro rata basis, the board should control. If these corporates or venture capital funds could run a business better than you, they'd probably be doing it. So the day-to-day matters should be controlled by the board, and investors, not any one investor. If it's seed, you might only have one and they've got a veto. But then if there's 3 investors, you're doing a Series B and there's 3 investor directors, a majority of them should be able to veto matters. Now, that's obviously hard fought, but again, you're leading the business. They should back you. They need appropriate veto rights of things that would, change their investment thesis or change the business so it sits outside of mandate, or do anything that could be dilutive to their investment. But otherwise, they should leave it up to you. But you should expect to have a board, someone from join the board in each round as a general rule. And if there's a second investor following on, putting in a large amount of money but not leading, they may ask for an observer right, which is like a very good child, seen and not heard. So they have the right to attend board meetings, but they don't have the right to vote. Now, you don't want to give those out like candy. You don't want to have a board of 4 and 14 observers. So you do need to have some de minimis around that. But that's generally how the board will develop over the course of your life. So it is important to set yourself well in the early stages so you don't put these silly anchoring positions in, which are very hard to unwind in subsequent rounds. Founder lockups. Oh boy, this varies across practice. Why don't I just turn very, very quickly on? I said I wouldn't go through the rest of it, but founders. Okay. Starting up here with founder non-competes. Nearly all shareholders agreements and all founder employment agreements should say that you're not allowed to leave the business and set up a competing business as soon as you leave. If I invest in your company, I want you devoting your time to this company, not just getting jack of it and setting up a competing company. Pretty obvious. That's, table stakes. Now we move around. Founder lockup. Okay, I'm investing in you at seed stage. I don't want you selling any shares for 3 years. I'm investing in you. If you leave, the business is kaput. So promise not to sell any of your shares for 3 years or 5 years, right? If I'm acting for a founder, I'm like, yep, that's fine, but I want a little bit of money off the table over the time. So maybe in years 3, 4, and 5, the founder can sell 5% of their holding in any given year, capped at maybe 10% across that 5-year period. So you can, if you do a good Series A or Series B and there's over demand, you can take a few $1 million each round off the table without materially impacting your holding in the company. Right? That's the difference between accepting terms and having someone who knows to fight in your corner. Founder vesting, early stage, not late stage. I'm investing seed stage. You've got 60% of the company. I say I want founder vesting over 3 years with a 12-month cliff. A lot of jargon. That means you hold your shares, but if you leave in those 3 years, you lose some of them. Pro rata over those 3 years, right? If you leave in the first 12 months, a cliff, you lose all of them. If you lose halfway, you lose half of them. If you leave 80% of the way, you keep 80, you lose 20. Similar to a vesting schedule in an ESOP. We're doing a Series C. Founder, the investor says, I'd like you to do a 3-year vest. I go, hang on. This is a $400 million company. The founder stakes worth $200 million. I'm not putting that at risk. Plus, they've got a sophisticated management team. If they get hit by a bus or leave, it's not fatal to the business. There's too much value tied up in this. So we might fall back to a founder lockup in lieu of a founder vesting. Very common at an early stage, and is sometimes quite advantageous if there's more than one founder, because if one of you leave, it frees up room on the cap table to bring someone else in, or you go up, right? Good leaver, bad leaver. After the founder vesting period, if you leave, you get to keep your shares. There might be a buyback right at fair market value. I'd push back on that. But if you're a bad leaver, you cook the books, you commit fraud, or you do something criminal within your role, the company can buy back your shares at a discount. The discount varies. I've seen some VCs want to buy it at a 90% discount early stage, but as you get later stage, it's probably more like a 20% discount. You can't have it at fair market value, so you're encouraged to sexually harass the staff in the hope that some VC will buy you out at fair market value. It's obviously anomalous outcome, but we do see those two linked together. This for a certain period, 3 years, this forever. Co-sale rights. Very much a US concept that's crept into Europe. If you as a founder sell, you give every other investor, or maybe the major investors, the right to sell on the same terms. I'm not sure if you've heard of that song, If You Leave Me, Can I Come Too? It's kind of the equivalent for investors, right? So if the founder leaves, they're saying that's fine, but you can't sell without affording me a right, which basically means unless shareholders waive their rights to this, you're not selling out for an exit, like a sale of all the business or an IPO. Again, your smart lawyer might employ the secondary sale carve out from the co-sale rights to let you take a little bit of money to de-risk your position, maybe buy a home or pay down the home loan over the life of the company, so you're not like living in a $1 million one-bedroom apartment in Bondi sitting on $300 million worth of paper. You might want to take a little bit of that off before you get to that stage. IP assignment rights, we want to make sure in any deal that the founders don't own the IP, the company does. So that's sort of a quick guide to all of the jargon, and that'll be like 1 or 2 lines in the term sheet. There's a lot to unpack. So you really want to get that right and see what buttons you can push at the term sheet stage. For some European investors, particularly closed-end funds that have to return money to capital within 7 or 10 years, they might say, if you have an exit in 5 years, I can take the reins and force an exit. I can run a sale process, run an IPO process, regardless of the market. All I care about is my fund timetable. We're seeing this a little bit more, creeping into maybe 5% of the deals, but pushing back pretty heavily on that, right? Because it can, you don't want to sell the company at in 2022 if you can avoid it. So look, we've actually run over time. So I might stop there for questions and then send the slides around, and also offer with each of you, if any of you want to call me, have a separate session, we're a big supporter and a sponsor of Climate Salad. I'm happy to meet with you to answer any questions, particularly questions you might not want to ask in front of everyone because it's a bit sensitive, or you're in the middle of a conversation with an investor and you don't want to broadcast it. I'm happy to do that. And as a lawyer, we'll of course keep that confidential. And Francois is also happy to take calls with you to, if there's any investors that he knows that might be of interest, or you say, have heard of this investor, do you know them? He's happy to extend his network to this cohort as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Stuart. As per usual, just an incredible wealth of knowledge and some really great tips on how to navigate the investment process. Does anyone have any questions? I know we have run a little bit over. If you do need to leave, I'll keep recording and we'll send this around afterwards, of course. Anyone have any questions? Done such a thorough job that everyone's all good.
Probably tired and hungry as well, given the time tonight.
I mean, that's a lot of information and obviously very significant in value. So yeah, so it's not easy to but thanks for that. That's very, very useful.
Look, hopefully you can tell Francois and I are very passionate about this. We've got the best job in corporate law, but there is a lot to unpack. And whether you go with us or someone, get a good lawyer. And by good lawyer, I mean someone that you like and that has done this before. You don't, if you're buying a house, you don't go to a lawyer who's like, well, I've never done a property transaction, but I can work it out. Same thing with your fundraise. There's a handful of lawyers in Australia that specialize in this space. So please go to one of those and don't pay someone to learn on the job.
Thanks, guys. That was one question I did have. Obviously, Stuart, you're based here in Australia, but connections with Europe, and Pippa, similarly, you're based over in the EU. Where are you seeing, I guess, appetite from investors, but also gaps from a solution perspective in the market? Like where investors are looking for something, but there is no solution.
Well, it's a hard one for me to answer, Prue, because I mean, the way, I guess in climate tech at the moment, there's probably a flood of companies that are looking at reporting. So there's a lot there. I think, I mean, in terms of some of the corporates as well, they're really looking for companies that can make a big difference to carbon abatement. Right? So there's a lot of VPP players. There's a lot of scope 2, 3 reporting players. We're starting to see some movement on the certification and then market exchange. So Expansive is someone we explore and we act with investors in that. I was dealing with a carbon hydrogen certification company recently. But I think the gaps that I see, and I don't have a perfect perspective of it because I see what does get funded, not what's not, but when I speak to particularly the corporates, they're looking at things like technology to do with good unit economics, waste to energy, looking to solve hydrogen transportation, looking at actual processes that can, build electrolyzers or develop green steel in a manufacturing sense that can move the dial. So while I see a lot of technology and there's a lot of good technology that can lead to optimization, I think getting, hydrogen power cells, hydrogen manufacturing, transport, and anything in the manufacturing process from coal-fired plants into electrolyzers and things like that will really move the dial. I mean, BlueScope started up a CVC, BHP's got one, Fortescue Future Industries have got one, BP, oil and gas have got one. Things that will, I still think there's like a little bit of a gap between things that will really impact the large scale emitters in their manufacturing process. You know, that's it. But then we're also seeing, you know, you've got a lot in terms of the energy generation, which is kind of more of an infrastructure play rather than a VC technology play. I think there's that gap in terms of the technology that'll assist manufacturing that would, in my mind, and you know what? I would almost see people fund that and then buy it pretty quickly.
Yeah.
To cut out that go-to-market. To be honest, corporates will be like, no, that's great. I'll buy you, like, and they'll just throw a couple $100 million on the table, enough to make intergenerational wealth for the founder, but they don't want to have to buy it when it's on an exchange and growing at a rapid rate, like a data center, and they go, I've missed the boat. So I was in Japan and Korea, meeting with all the big sort of trading houses and large corporates, and they kind of said to me it was a little bit like shooting at a moving target. Like placing early bets is hard because it's sort of hard to pick winners, and then once something has got the market traction, they're taking off. It's hard to get them at a good price. So that's sort of the live feedback I've had in the last 10 days.
Thank you, Stuart. Appreciate it.
Pippa would know a lot better than me.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I think, I mean, again, we're kind of skewing towards VC, obviously, because that's what we're talking about today. Just want to say, obviously, there are other sources of capital, and they are all looking for different things. So VCs are generally looking for companies that they believe can grow very quickly, so high growth potential, and have the potential to become highly valuable. And that's usually going to mean that you've got some kind of sustainable competitive advantage, whether it's technology or execution or first to market or something. But you know, in the case of deep tech companies, it's going to be the tech. So you know, that's what you've got to be crystal clear on. And if you've got something compelling there, then you will be valuable and you will get attention. And I think that's the difficult thing, is when a lot of the founders we talk to are just trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. And it's like, well, look, if you don't have the potential to be a high growth company, you will not going to get funding from a VC. But it's also not sufficient, because they also, you know, there's a lot of other factors going on as well. They need to like you. They're going to spend time with you. They've got to think you've got integrity. They've got to, you know, there's a lot of things going on. So you have to kind of, it is like searching for a needle in a haystack on both sides, right? But the more you can tick those boxes of having that high growth potential, and you know, having something that's going to be valuable, and you know, in the climate world, that means you're solving the big problems. And you know, for us, that's been a very welcome shift over the last few years. I think everybody started off kind of picking around the edges because they didn't think there was market appetite to do the big stuff. But I think now everybody's coming around to the mindset of like, this is non-negotiable. Solving big problems is valuable. We might not be entirely clear on the business models or the regulation or the go-to-market, but we know that if we can fix steel or cement or fertilizer, like that is going to be valuable. So that's more, you know, that's how we think about the world, and that's more, I think, we're seeing the shift around to that. So, you know, I would agree with what Stuart was saying, that, you know, that's looking like hard to abate stuff, right? The industry, you know, high temperature heating, heavy transportation. It's not, you know, carbon footprint tracking apps, or you know that was 2019, right? And it's even not, you know, carbon accounting. As you say, there's a dozen of those out there already. Yeah, everybody's placed their bet. You know, that ship has sailed, or that it's not interesting. Right. So like keep going until you found something that you think is really, you know, unique. And has that sustainable competitive advantage.
Thanks, Pippa. Francois.
Francois, you're on mute.
Thanks, Stuart.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry. Yes, I just wanted to give you a couple of case studies in that space that have been attracting a lot of attention from investors recently. One of them is a French company that has created a new renewable energy called osmotic energy. Osmotic is quite well known, but they have managed to design and manufacture a material that is able to capture the electricity generated by the ion between between salt water to fresh water, and they are currently creating a large industrial plant together with the French electricity producer EDF and another corporate venture. So that's typically the type of projects that would be huge potentially. And on the other side, there's a lot of activity in the agri-tech space, like companies creating and manufacturing biosolutions to replace fertilizers or to replace pesticides. And that type of project also attracts a lot of attention from impact funds generally. And actually, there's this impact investment space is also very active, growing rapidly in the market. Some of them being genuine impact investors. And one last comment I wanted to make regarding your space. It's interesting to see also VC funds that are located both in APAC and in Europe, like one called Shift for Good that is dedicated to mobility. And they are now, they have been set up in France with a French vehicle, but the team is split between Singapore and Paris. And they are really looking at investment opportunities in the climate change applied in particular to the transportation and mobility in the whole region, in the whole APAC region. So I think it's a good example of investors looking more globally to other markets than their region, the local jurisdiction only.
Thanks, Francois.
That's a great point that Francois makes. There's actually an Airtable database of VCs that shows their co-locations, and there's quite a few that are co-located in Australia and APAC, and I can send that link out in my follow-up email after tomorrow. I think that's running into the end of the hour, so we might wrap it up there. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming along. Been a really amazing now 2 hours of content, so thank you for extending your evening with us, and thank you so much, Pippa, Stuart, and Francois for joining us. I'll be in touch with the recording of today and contact details and how you can get in touch with the three brains on the call. And yeah, any further questions, give me a shout. Happy to answer those as well.
Thanks, guys. That was awesome.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, team.
Bye.
Thanks, Pippa.
Thanks.
Bye.